Okay, so this week we're going to cover week 10 of course content, in which we talk about young adulthood and the relationships that they are fostering during this time. So, in terms of having HERS developmental tasks, I mean, a lot of us are probably very familiar with this because we either have navigated our way through this stage very recently, or we are still kind of in the middle of this stage, in which we're finding a mate and we're kind of settling into our lives. Uh, Late adolescence was about kind of figuring out who we are as individuals, and now we're taking that understanding of who we are and we're moving forward uh, in kind of starting a family of our own or having kids of our own. We're starting and getting settled into our occupation. We talked about last time the various stages of occupational development, Tiedemann's theory. And we're also talking about finding a social group and kind of developing friendships that are not necessarily um, as as critical as they were for adolescents, but still important for us as social beings. So it all kind of breaks down into these four areas: exploring intimate relationships, childbearing, work, and kind of developing your own sort of lifestyle, your own sort of standards for living. So, in terms of how how this stage is kind of defined, it's kind of important to kind of ask this question because uh, adulthood is kind of being pushed back a lot in our society by people going to school and still exploring themselves into their late 20s and even early 30s, and sometimes even beyond that. And so, are these individuals who are doing this, are they still within the uh, within Erikson's previous stage? Um, are they still kind of trying to find themselves in terms of identity, and perhaps are in a stage of moratorium in terms of what Marcia talked about? Um, it's a difficult question to answer, really, and it's something to consider, especially whenever we're working with people who are uh, perhaps younger adults who are not yet into their career, not yet married, not yet kind of where they want to, where they want to be and where they see other people from their generation being. So, for instance, as an example, I'm 30 years old and I'm just now getting done with my advanced degree. And I'm looking at other people, and they've already got careers. They're managers. They've got companies of their own. They've got kids. They've been married for 10+ years, and I'm just kind of like, huh, maybe my life could have been different, or I really wish that my life had perhaps started earlier than what it is currently. And so, working with somebody who is experiencing this sort of dissonance in their identity is very important to consider whenever we're working with people of this particular gray area of development. Okay, and the things that we kind of have used to define whether or not people are into their adulthood is end of schooling. Well, what happens if they're not done with school, or they're becoming financially independent, or living apart from their family? They're married, they've had kids. All of those things that I just mentioned that I saw other people doing, and I kind of was saying to myself, "Huh, I'm not there yet." Apparently, in a social norm or socially accepted identity of what it means to be an adult. But in terms of psychological markers, it's a bit different. So instead of being instead of accumulating knowledge like the child and the adolescent have since they've been, kids, they're now applying knowledge. And that's the difference that I noticed in what I was doing. I was becoming, more professional. I was developing a sense of, okay, this is how you do things. And I was applying the knowledge that I was accumulating from my education. So perhaps the psychological markers are maybe in dissonance with the social markers at times. Intimacy. Obviously, we're trying to kind of find a mate. We're trying to find a partner to go through life with. Be that, somebody you're going to cohabitate with, somebody that you are going to marry, something like that. A friend, who knows? And you also see less risky behaviors. And the reason this is a psychological marker as opposed to a social marker or a behavioral marker is that at this age, around the age of 25, the frontal cortex of a human brain fully matures. It becomes fully myelinated, and the connections are all made. It's the last part of the brain to really fully mature. And so at this point, before that, and there were a lot of risky behaviors. And the prefrontal cortex and the frontal cortex do a lot of planning. They do a lot of inhibition of behavior. It does sort of an organizational ability to kind of say to oneself, okay, is what I'm going to do going to benefit me or hurt me in the end? And so you see a lot less risky behaviors once people are able to kind of make those sorts of logical connections. So again, the psychological markers of adulthood may be different. They may be different from the social role markers that society has created. Something to think about. So in terms of Erikson's stage, this is intimacy versus isolation. And Erikson has this to say about this stage. It is only as young people emerge from their identity struggles that their egos can master the sixth stage, that of intimacy. The avoidance of such experiences because of fear of ego loss may lead to a deep sense of isolation and consequent self-absorption. So what I want you to take from this is the avoidance causes people to turn inward. And a lot of times what you'll see is people become not only isolated from other people, but they almost become a narcissistic sort of person. They say it becomes all about them. They're self-absorbed. They're selfish, and they can only really think of themselves. It's only through interaction and relationships with other people that we can fully become relational beings and think about other people and enjoy a relationship with other people. I know that sounds kind of, redundant, but it's true. Now, in terms of Erikson's, the 6 aspects of Erikson's stages plus Gleason's lesson, the central process of this is mutuality among peers. It's a mutual relationship. That makes sense, right? You're seeking to have a partnership. And so the significant relationship is your partner. And so you are seeking intimacy, maybe not necessarily with a marital partner, but maybe with somebody that you live with, or a significant other, a friend, a close relation of some sort. The adaptive ego quality that comes from this is love. Now, one of the things that Erikson pulls heavily from is Freudian theory. And so one of the big aspects of Freudian theory is the importance of work and love, or as Freud calls it, Lieben und Arbeiten. Work and love, they're the driving forces. And Erikson pulls love as one of the main forces, or the adaptive ego quality of this stage, and applies it here. And he says that is the benefit, that's the goal of this stage. That's what is good that comes from this stage. The core pathology, though, is exclusivity. And just like I said before, they become self-absorbed and isolated. Erikson himself, in his book Identity, Youth, and Crisis, has a different word for it. He calls it distantiation. I like it. It's distance from other people. And he has this to say about it. The counterpart of intimacy is distantiation, the readiness to repudiate, isolate, and if necessary, destroy those forces and people whose essence seems dangerous to one's own. Thus, the lasting consequence of the need for distantiation is the readiness to fortify one's territory of intimacy and solidarity, and to view all outsiders with a fanatic, quote, overvaluation of small differences, end quote, between the familiar and the foreign. So what's he saying there? Basically, the person is hyper aware of other people. It's almost like by distancing themselves, they become so focused on other people that they're obsessed with it. It's almost an obsession for them. They nitpick. They find every little thing wrong. And so they find reasons for not relating with other people. They find reasons for distancing themselves and becoming exclusive and narcissistic and self-absorbed. And so these people are distantiated, as it were. They're distanced. And they self-impose that distance out of fear, past experiences perhaps, a sense of identity, of being a loner. Erikson draws a heavy correlation between intimacy and isolation and the previous stage of identity versus role confusion. Such that, he says, has this to say about it. In late adolescence or early adulthood, he may settle for highly stereotyped interpersonal relations and come to retain a deep sense of isolation. So it's because of what has happened in the identity stage that leads into a desire for isolation. If the times favor an impersonal kind of interpersonal pattern, a man can go far, very far in life, and yet harbor a severe character problem, doubly painful because he will never feel really himself, although everybody says he is somebody. So what he does there is he brings in the idea of, okay, so if their identity has become one that promotes exclusivity, and society, remember this is psychosocial theory, if society is such that it reinforces that exclusive, and isolative behavior, perhaps if the person, is in a business profession or law or something like that, and they're all about the business. They're all about, they're workaholics. They're all about staying there till 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night and then coming back in at 6 a.m. in the morning and getting back to it. Society, if it is one that promotes exclusivity, may actually call the person somebody, whereas deep inside they feel a sense of loss, a sense of being not quite right. Something to think about. So the principle of social order here is to cooperate and to compete. So we recognize at this stage that some people we cooperate with, other people we compete with. It is essentially a combination of love and exclusivity. Taken to an extreme, this can become a pathology. But competition is a level of exclusivity that is possibly healthy, right? If we are competing, we're driven, we're motivated to do better than somebody else or to be at a higher income bracket, for instance, or competing to be the best in our class or something of that nature. And whereas we compete with those people, other people we cooperate with, our spouses, our partners, friends in class, coworkers, people who can help us get the job done. The ritualism of this stage is you can be affiliative or in supportive relationships, cooperative, showing love, yes, or elitist, narcissistic, standoffish, exclusive, highly competitive. It's taking that competitiveness to the extreme and becoming sort of that elitist type of person. I don't need anyone. I'm a lone wolf. People are dangerous to me. People are threats. So I cut myself off. That sort of thing. Gleason comes up with the idea of Christology for this stage. And he says that during this stage, during early adulthood, we come to an intimate relationship with Christ. Christology being the study of Christ. And that implies that we are delving into who Christ was, what it means to be a Christian, how we can have the Holy Spirit in our hearts and in our lives and relate intimately with God because the Holy Spirit is in us, sent by Christ. His love, the affiliation between us and Christ, the cooperation between us towards God's plans for our lives. Understanding that God loves us and Christ died because he loves us. And it's from that knowledge, having an intimate relationship with Christ. Understanding who he is to us, what he did for us, and what we as Christians should do for him. Now, in terms of love and relationships, there are a lot of different theories on this. Like I said before, you have Freud, who brought up the idea of love and work. Fromm, who wrote many books on love and the concept of relating to others, Erich Fromm talks about how love can assist us in becoming more truly human. It's very much akin to your reciprocating self-text. Then Erikson, of course, we just talked about. Sternberg, we'll touch on in just a minute, talks about three elements of love: passion, commitment, and intimacy. And we'll get into that in just a second. And then there's the evolutionary, biological fight versus flight, or the competitive aspect, versus the tend to befriend, the affiliative aspect, or the cooperative aspect of life, and how that promotes evolutionary difference and things of that nature. Okay, so relationships for young adults. What we're going to do is this is kind of an organizational slide. We're going to focus on friendship patterns in males and females, relationship patterns in young adults, and also the concept of divorce and remarriage. So men with other men, we're talking about friendships among, same gender friendships. Men tend to have few close relationships, but those relationships tend to be very deep that are created. It tends to be, guys tend to have a relationship that's activity focused. We're going to do things. We're going to, go fishing, hunting. We're going to build something. We're going to, play ball. We're going to go to the golf course. We're doing something. The emotional connection isn't really emphasized. It's there, but it's not quite emphasized as much as it is with female relationships. Now, females tend to have more close friendships that are more emotion-based. Okay, there's more communication, there's more talking, things of that nature. And then there's more sharing of that emotional content. Competition is an aspect for guys, whereas confiding is more an aspect for female friendships. Now, as I said before, competition isn't necessarily bad, and it's very much tied in with activities. So don't think of male friendships as, oh, we're constantly trying to beat each other over the head with a stick. No, it's not that bad. It's just more of a, hey, we're going to go do this and see which one of us, gets a higher score, perhaps. Now, in terms of cross-gender relationships, males do tend to sexualize cross-gender friendships more often than females do. I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole, but I haven't seen the research on why this is, but I can only speculate, and I don't want to speculate incorrectly. So we'll move on from this. Now, in terms of love and relational love, you can see that there is a cultural difference here. In terms of what predicts love relationships, females, American females, Japanese males and females look more at personality. Okay, whereas American males and Russian males typically look more towards physical appearance. Now, remember, this is in university students. And then Russian females typically look more towards reciprocal liking. And one of the things that you're going to hear constantly over and over again in this presentation is there's a cultural difference, there's a gender difference, there's an ethnicity difference, there's a age group difference. So be very aware of the fact that there's a lot of studies looking at relationships, and there's a lot of studies finding that there are cultural differences here. Okay. So in terms of Sternberg, we mentioned that he had a triarchic theory of love. His theory emphasizes commitment, intimacy, and passion. Now, intimacy has the emotional aspect of love, all right? Passion has the physical aspect, or the intensity, the infatuative aspect of love. And then commitment is more of the mental or the cognitive aspect. And Sternberg calls this empty love. I'm not certain I like that concept, but it's not my place to comment, other than the fact that I will explain it as being empty love because there's a lack of emotion. It's all mental. There's no heart to it. Okay? Now, from these three, Sternberg created 4 different combinations of love. The fatuous love, which is passion and commitment. This is the hot and the passionate love. It's quick, and sometimes it burns out quick. Then there's the romantic love. That's the passion and the intimacy, and it's what you read about in romance novels all the time, and you see in romantic comedies and things like that. And that's nice and touchy-feely and fluffy. And then there's companionate love. Now, this is what you see when you think of when you think of childhood friends, for instance. They've grown up together, they've experienced life together, and they, are friends first, and they get married second. So this is a marriage. The positive aspect is that it's a long-term engagement sort of thing, and it's a long-term commitment. But sometimes it's lacking passion, lacking that emotion aspect. Then you have a combination of all three. Consonant love. And that is where you have the passion, and you have the devotion that comes from that commitment, and you have the emotional friendship and the liking. And so this is obviously comes together in the form of a triangle. And what many marriage therapists have done is they've taken this triangle and said, okay, here's the guy's triangle, here's the wife's triangle, and how do they kind of superimpose? And what you typically see is couples who have a lot of conflict and things like that are typically in the moderate to severely mismatched involvement. Okay, he wants sex all the time and passion. She wants a companion and a friend. But then you have more of the closely matched involvements. And typically what you see is these two more often than not. This one, typically, these are the people that will come in and just come in for marriage therapy to say, oh, we tried before getting a divorce. And typically you don't often see somebody or a couple who is so closely matched like this, because why would they come in for marital therapy? If they're so closely matched like that. There are reasons they might, and they're very fun and nice to work with. But typically you'll see, more often than not, these two kinds of couples. And this kind of couple, but they may or may not stay for very long in therapy. So let's talk about different lifestyles, different life patterns of relating. Obviously, some people choose to remain single. And we've talked about, the isolation and the distance that some people impose upon themselves. And it's oftentimes because they have difficulty dealing with others' expectations. Then you have cohabitation. And your book does a decent job of kind of going into the different types of cohabitation, because there are many. And they are very culturally contingent. You can have cohabitation leading to marriage, cohabitation that is short-term, cohabitation that's more long-term, not leading to marriage, things like that. I would encourage you to look at your book for a greater coverage of that. You see a lot of younger adults doing this, and it's typically for financial reasons. It's typically for, hey, I'm not fully on my feet yet. Hey, you want to get a room, or a apartment or something like that and share the rent, sort of thing. Then you have marriage. And so I won't touch on this quite yet. Marital satisfaction declines with the birth of the children. I'll touch on that in just a bit, but know that is a trend, and we'll talk about that. And that shared values and interests typically are one of the main reasons why people get married, and a sense of intimacy and saying, I identify myself as somebody who wants to get married, who wants a companion. In terms of homosexual lifestyles, though, there are several trends that we have found in research, and that is that relationship problems are typically prevalent, just as prevalent in homosexual marriages as they are in heterosexual marriages. It's not that heterosexual marriages typically have more, fights or spousal abuse or anything like that. No, the rates are generally the same. Lesbian couples do typically exhibit a more egalitarian relationship and have longer lasting relationships than gay males. Why that is, I can only speculate at. There could be a variety of reasons. Their frequency of sexual expression varies just the same as in a heterosexual relationship. And legal opinions do conflict on rights of gay and lesbian parenting. Now, this is kind of a hot button issue right now, especially with various states saying, oh, it's legal for homosexual couples to get married. Well, what's the natural extension of this? After marriage, and after perhaps all 50 states, perhaps one day will, make it legal for homosexual couples to get married. Well, the next step is going to be parenting issues and the legal ramifications of homosexual parenting. So this is obviously a social issue that is not going to be going away anytime soon. Data on children raised by different types of parents, meaning homosexual parents or versus heterosexual parents, is in fact inadequate to draw conclusions at this time. There's a lot of studies saying, there's no change or there's no difference in children raised by homosexual versus heterosexual couples, other than the fact that perhaps the children are a little bit more accepting of and open to the homosexual lifestyle. Not necessarily saying that they will become homosexual themselves, but that they are more accepting of it. So data is sparse, and there could be various reasons for that. But hopefully in time, research will be done more in this area. In terms of age differences, remember now I'm bringing up the idea of there are cultural differences here. So age cohorts are demonstrating different marriage and relational trends, let's call it. For instance, the baby boomers typically remain single in early life, and they had fewer children than previous generations. Those who had children had smaller numbers. Well, this could be for a variety of reasons. I mean, it may not necessarily be because of any one reason, but could be because prior to World War II, people were living on large plots of land, perhaps. Maybe they farmed more and needed more help around the house, so they had more children, perhaps. I don't know. And also, with baby boomers, you saw more women going into the workforce. So women's liberation, women's rights were a hot topic as these young women began entering the workforce. And nowadays, you typically see stats that are around these numbers. So about 30% of married couples are without children, about a third. Fewer, actually, 26% are married couples with children, married with children. 12% have a female head with no spouse, 3% male head with no spouse. 24% live alone, and 5% live with non-relatives. Now, you made this kind of a difficult chart to see here, and I told you I would kind of go over this. Some studies have found that as we have children, our marital satisfaction begins to decline, and it goes up slightly between newlywed and new parenting. Okay, we made a little person. We're happy with each other. We feel like we've got things together. And then that little person begins to grow up. And as they're in preschool, their satisfaction, okay, it's about where it was, when they were newlyweds. Parents of elementary school children, okay, we're starting to see a little bit of a decline here. Parents of young adolescents, and then parents of children about to leave the home is when it typically bottoms out. And they typically have the least amount of satisfaction. Now, this goes back up after the child leaves the house and into retirement. Here's the thing with this. This is a chart, but it doesn't tell you a couple things. One, let's start with what it does tell you. One, it says percentage of very satisfied with marriage. Okay, well, I would venture to say that marital satisfaction typically, evens out over time. Sure, we're great and we're having a lot of fun at the beginning, and then we get into work and things like that, and maybe the very satisfied goes down to maybe I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied with my marriage. I'm happy. I'm okay. I would venture to say that probably you don't go from very satisfied to very dissatisfied, in quite as quickly, quite as drastically. You don't see on this how high the sample size was. You don't. There's no question, or man, I'm having a difficult time speaking. There's no information as to did these couples seek counseling? Did they have premarital counseling? Did they have, counseling before having children? What is their occupation? What's their education level? Are these people, how old are these people when they have children? This does not show you that, okay? This is just basically saying, okay, those who have a very satisfied relationship or a very satisfied marriage typically declines. But there are a lot of holes in this. And there's a lot of information that's not shown here. So don't take this as, I'm having Bob and Sue come for counseling today. Oh, they've got a teenage son. Well, they're probably feeling pretty dissatisfied with their relationship. Well, no, this doesn't say that. So just take this with a grain of salt, okay? All right. Generally speaking, though, the trends that have been presented in research do suggest that marital satisfaction does go down with the birth of the first child. It goes back up when the children are, getting out of the house and empty nesters. And eventually, by the end of it, you're back up to where you were whenever you were newly married. One thing to keep in mind, I would say, in terms of marriage and divorce, is that the duration of most marriages in the U.S. is about a decade, about 10 years. And you have to ask yourself kind of why. Why do you think that is? How old were these people when they got married? Do they have kids? What's their occupation? Things of that nature. So again, the statistics and the information that I'm about to present to you, I want you to think in terms of a critical mindset. Excuse me. So across age cohorts, early 1900s, 1950s, 2000s, have seen a huge difference in family structure, in divorce rates, in work environment, in number of kids that are being raised, the sorts of education that people are receiving, how people bring in, whether or not they bring in extended family members and care for them in their old age. Do they get remarried? Do they have stepkids? Do they adopt? You've seen a whole lot of change in just these past 100 years. And this is evidenced in this small chart here that doesn't even really cover everything. Like close. So let's talk about divorce here. As you can see here, the U.S. divorce rates in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s per 1,000 marriages. So in the 1970s and 1970 and 1980, you had people between the ages of 20 and 29 getting divorced most often. But that changed in 1985, and the change was even more disparate in the 1990s, in which 30 to 39-year-olds actually started getting divorced more often than 20 to 29-year-olds. And there could be a variety of reasons for that. Perhaps these people got married at a younger age, and so they got divorced at a younger age. And perhaps the 30 to 39 bracket here is more representative of people getting divorced who were married in their late 20s, perhaps. Whereas these people may have been married in their late teens to early 20s. I don't know. And like I said earlier, the marital dissolution rates typically peak around 10 years of marriage. And then it drops precipitously and kind of evens out here around the 15 to 20 year mark. So, what's going on in this decade of marriage that is causing such conflict, that's causing such a divorce rate? Perhaps people are not committed, and this is just a representation of how many people were really committed to their relationship. Maybe this is people are getting married at a young age and they don't really know who they are. They're trying to figure themselves out, and part of that's not being married like I thought. Okay, wonderful. See you later. Maybe this is, there are some quick changes occurring in the relationship, and one partner can't handle that. I don't know, but there could be a variety of reasons for it. So, in terms of percentages, you see a huge change between 1950 and 2000. The percentage of divorces, of people divorced, was about steady in the 1950s to the 1970s. But in the 1980s, it really popped, especially for the 25 to 34 and the 35 to 59 age bracket. This maintained across the 90s and into the 2000s. And you're even seeing growing rates of people 35 to 59 being divorced. I won't say getting divorced, being divorced. This may suggest that these people are recognizing that they don't really want somebody in their life. Perhaps there's no telling. I mean, it could be for a variety of reasons why you would see this happen. But you got to also remember that some of these people who were divorced in 1970 may have been divorced in 1980, may have been divorced in 1990 and into the 2000s. Who knows? But this is something, to keep in mind, that the number of people, population-wise, the percentage of people who are divorced is on the rise for certain groups. It's actually kind of dropping for the 25 to 34 range. So, something to think about. So, 1 in 2 marriages do end in divorce. That is a statistic that's been kind of found for many, across many studies. But it does depend on what kind of study, where they get their stats, what stats they run, things like that. Men do typically have it harder in the beginning, but women typically have it harder in the long term due to financial problems, financial inequality, being perhaps the primary parent for the children, things of that nature. They have difficulties with child support and visitation oftentimes, and there's often a problem with relating to the children after a divorce. It changes. After a divorce occurs, parenting styles typically change. The father becomes either distant or, more often than not, he becomes distant. And the mother oftentimes becomes much more authoritarian in the way she parents. Typically, mothers have less time and money than their divorced husbands, but fathers typically have more of a limited contact with their children. In terms of remarriage, you typically see that most divorced couples do remarry. Not saying that the couples get back together, but most individuals within the couple go off and marry somebody else. And these second marriages oftentimes are even more prone to getting divorced than their original marriage. Why that is, I'm not sure. Perhaps they feel like, hey, I've done it once before. I'm not, the taboo is gone and I can just go into a marriage, low commitment, and just, see how this works out. If it doesn't work out for me, I'm out. I don't know. Maybe that's unfair to say, but it's possible. Stepchildren typically make situations very complicated because they're saying, well, you're not my father, you're not my mother. I don't want you here. I'm doing just fine with my parent without you. Why are you here? I don't get this. So it creates conflict at times. It's a rare situation where it's an easy transition. Typically, if they get married in later life, there's still problems. So the adult parents of divorced parent, adult children of divorced parents, typically will, object. Sometimes will object, and sometimes very vehemently against their parent getting remarried. They see the person as an interloper, somebody who's unnecessary. So let's talk in terms of applications of this material. So if we have people coming into our therapy rooms and saying, I'm having problems with my wife, or I'm not sure, I want to stay in this relationship. How are we going to think about that? Are we going to say to ourselves, oh, they're in the first decade of their marriage, I can't do anything about it. They're destined to get divorced. No, not at all. But what can we take from this? Perhaps we can say, all right, well, let's examine the way you two relate with one another and look at, what you want in a relationship. Are you high? Do you kind of want a lot of compassion and emotional connection? And does he or she want a lot of sex and touch and, things like that you're just not comfortable with? How can we work with that? How can we, kind of find a good middle ground here? What about divorce? Oftentimes, one of the hardest things that I've heard my cohort mates talk about is my client wants a divorce from their family or from their spouse. And I really think that they should do it. But I feel like I can't say that because I would be putting my own opinion out there. Or I don't want to say that because I'm a Christian and God hates divorce. Something like that. So where do you kind of stand in terms of your personal and religious values and divorce? And perhaps, how should we interpret somebody who is very exclusive, somebody who is distantiated and has broken themselves away from many intimate relationships? Should we see them as somebody who had a deficit in their identity development? Or, should we kind of explore that in a deeper sort of way with them? And in terms of spiritual applications, well, my divorce question stands, in terms of how a Christian therapist should approach the concept of divorce. Leading home and spiritual development. How do we grow in our relationship with God after we have kind of had children of our own and seen and felt the love towards our own children? Do we understand the love God has for us in a bit more of a deep perspective? In terms of multicultural, what have we talked about this entire time? I mean, there are ethnic, gender, age cohort differences that are in play, that have been noted in multiple studies pertaining to how marriages and divorces and attraction occurs across cultures. So, what if somebody comes in for therapy who is of a Middle Eastern ethnicity and they say, I want a divorce? Well, what does that mean for that particular culture? What does it mean for a wife and a husband to have marital conflict in an Eastern culture, Oriental culture, South American culture? Who knows? You need to kind of get up on the research on this. So that does it for this presentation. There's going to be one more presentation this week on Fowler's theories of spiritual development for stages, I believe, stage 3 through 6. So this is presentation A, and there will be a second one that will be posted after this. So until then, I hope that I can answer any questions that you have for me, and if I can be of any assistance, please let me know. All right? All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys, for watching. I hope you have a great week and good studies.